Here we go. So, sorry, Julian, I'm going to repeat a question I asked you because there was a slight interruption there unintentionally. Your position have been executive positions within the industry, and I positioned it as a sort of chief executive, manager, general manager, managing director. Can you just give me the sort of what the correct executive type positions you currently hold and have held?
Yeah, well, for the last sort of 10, 15 years, I've really sort of operated as a CEO. And by that, I've been operating as a CEO of a broking business. That happened to be a global business operating in about 12 countries. I've been the CEO of an insurance business operating headquartered out of London. And my remit was covering sort of all of Europe, all of Asia, and a bit of Bermuda. And more recently, and currently what I'm doing is CEO of a part of a big Japanese insurance company, actually the second largest Japanese insurance company in the world. And I run their business in Europe and in Bermuda. And to put that in context, that is around about $1.5 billion of premium, because that's kind of one of the measures we use, which is effectively the turnover of a company. We have offices in about 8 countries around Europe and Bermuda, and we currently have about 600-700 employees under my area of the business. So yes.
With that, so it's a sizable organization. It's got a very far reach, and it's got a very big portfolio of areas in which you're involved, but also in terms of finance, it's a big company. So what is the size of the team that directly supports you as CEO? What is your executive team? How big is it, and how many people is it?
Currently, it is about 8 people. And I would say that the core of that is probably 4 people. So there are about 5 of us that I rely on to help me and guide me and work very closely with me. We're still in lockdown. It's been a strange experience of trying to run a team in this environment. But I decided pretty early on, back in March last year, that we needed to have sort of regular dialogue of those 5 people in total. So, we took the decision at 5 o'clock every day that the 5 of us would get together. Sometimes we'd have a call lasting 1 minute, sometimes it would last 1 hour. But I've used that core group to help us and support running the company throughout lockdown.
Okay, so I mean, I think we're already seeing that you understand that no man is an island, and everybody needs a team around them if they're in a senior position to be effective. Can I ask you, first of all, since we've talked about your team, what are the attributes that you regard you need from any team in your organization to be high performing? Are there any specific things that you could put your finger on? You say, I need these things, behaviors or performance metrics or attitudes, or what would you say if I said, what makes a high performing team for you?
Well, for me, it's always been about people who are that will share the same sort of values and work ethics. They all need to have their own skills. In a team, if you're in a company running an insurance company, you've got to have somebody who really understands operational issues, someone who really understands the risk issues, and we call them underwriters in our world. You need people who understand the finances, and you need people who understand people. So they need to have those core skills. But above all else, people are individuals, and they have different strengths. They have different ways of behaving. But what I look for is commitment and loyalty. And as part of that, a willingness to work together as part of a team, to accept that people are individuals and that they can fit in and adapt accordingly.
So here's a question that might surprise you. You and I once worked with a team that you had, a senior team, one of whom challenged you on, he was a very effective person and actually great fun to be around with drink in hand. but he was somebody who I know challenged you in his ability to be late for every single meeting he ever attended, and little things that suggested that maybe there was a disconnect somewhere. Do you think that we should be accepting of people just the way they are, or do you think that to a certain extent a high performing team has to choose the right attitude? And the second question is, do you have to like someone for them to be an effective member of your team?
Yeah, let's deal with the second question first, if I may. I don't think you need to like them. You're not asking to marry your team members. You've got to have the ability to be able to work with them, and everyone's got their faults and their weaknesses, and people annoy people in sometimes very very minor ways. So you've got to have a tolerance and be able to work with people. So I think as part of any top performing team, it's really important to have honest and direct dialogue and feedback. And that's not a one-way process. But if things are not working well, you need to kind of get that out on the table and deal with it. You don't need to do it in an aggressive way, but you can't let these things fester. And I think you need to recognize that no one is perfect, right? I'm not perfect, and I know that I can improve, and I try and improve every day in terms of what I do. But you can only improve if someone tells you what you're doing wrong. So honest and transparent dialogue, I think, is really, really important in any team environment.
Okay, so transparency and openness and honesty, and if you like, having the, would you agree therefore that the platform of great performance is trust? Because if you've got the right trust, you can have the honest conversations. So if you and I work together and we trust each other, if you need to say, Catsy, look, I'm not sure that's going to work for me. I trust you and you trust me, so we can have the right dialogue. Let's just talk about conflict for a minute. Do you think conflict is an important business attribute for successful teams, and do you think we should be better at it, or do you think we should avoid it?
Yeah, conflict means different things to different people. I view it as having constructive challenge is a very, very healthy ingredient. Conflict can mean you can walk into a room and go and punch somebody and walk straight back out again. I don't think that's a very healthy way to operate.
No.
But what I do expect is constructive challenge in any team environment, because, and I say to guys I work with that I know I don't have all the answers, and I don't expect to have all the answers, but collectively will be better than my individual opinion about something. So it is really important to encourage and solicit feedback and then to act upon it. So it doesn't need to be conflict, it just needs to be challenge and debate, I think.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing from you is that it's not necessarily something we seek out, but challenge and debate are required, and it goes back to what you said. If you have something to say it, and then you'll be able to deal with it effectively. So let me ask you a question. You're what I would regard as a high-performing individual in high-performing environments. I mean, the insurance industry famously is, the big companies at least are successful and they make a lot of money. What has been your biggest challenge? Can you think of the biggest challenge you've ever faced in your career? And how have you overcome it, or haven't you?
I've had many challenges. I think probably my biggest challenge has been myself. If I look back over my time, both working and when I was at school, I probably still am, a very, very impatient individual. And that's a great quality sometimes, but it can also be a very frustrating quality, because impatience can lead you to think that you're better than you actually are, you deserve more than you actually achieved so far. So probably as a 20-year-old, I was probably a complete pain in the arse to manage, because I was always sort of wanting to kind of get on, and I always felt I should get paid more, I should do more, and I remember being very, very frustrated in certain situations. But as you get older, you kind of learn to channel that and deal with it and recognize it. So I've had different challenges, over different phases of my career. Recently, I've spent a lot of time trying to think through how you work with failure.
Okay.
I remember going for, a very significant job when I was working at Lloyd's of London. Well, I'll be very open about it. I was interviewed to be the CEO of Lloyd's. I was led to believe that I was going to be the next CEO of Lloyd's, and they went through a process and I was interviewed, and I didn't get the job. And I was devastated at the time,
And did that affect your self-confidence? Did it affect your personal self-belief at all?
Yeah, no, it did. And you start questioning, why I didn't get the job, what have I done wrong? Why is someone better than me? All those sort of things. And it was a period of self-reflection for me where I realized that everyone fails at various points, and it's not just to be a CEO. It could be, a failure that you don't coach a rugby team as effectively as you should have done. And I started thinking about it, and then I realized that once you accept that you all fail at various things and various tasks, what's most important is figuring out how to deal with it. And I listened to currently, in the world of lockdown, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I like following sports. I listen to, a lot of people talking about sailing or rugby and things like that. And whether you're an Olympic athlete or whether, you're taking your first trip down the 100-meter track, you don't always win. So you've actually got to learn how to deal with failure, process it and learn from it, and then move on.
So just on that, jumping in, because it ties into one of the questions I wanted to ask you. We found a big requirement in industry generically from companies like mine that do development and support for training in resilience. How do you make your teams more resilient? Would you say that that's an important factor?
Well, resilience is clearly it's important because things never go your own way, and it might be personal failure, it might be external circumstances that affect your situation, but you've got to learn how to deal with bad stuff that happens.
Okay.
So resilience clearly is very important, but you can't just sort of go into meltdown once bad stuff happens. You've got to kind of deal with it and figure out how you can pull together and get through it. And if I look back upon the times that I went for a position, I didn't get it, or something happened and I felt I was on the wrong side of something, at the time you get pretty angry about it, and I beat myself up because I think why am I second and no one likes coming second. But actually underneath it all, you end up being stronger as a result of it. So the question I always ask myself now is, what can I learn from this experience?
Okay, so, and I think that's a really important takeaway, that high performance depends on your attitude and your ability to learn from failure and success.
Yeah.
So another question then, because you talked about, nobody wants to come second and it's that winning mentality. I'm not sure that's true. Some people don't necessarily want to come first. They just want to be as good as they can be in what they're actually doing. But it ties into something else. And do you think, in terms of high performance, emotional intelligence and in particular empathy are particularly important? So do you think you need to be able to understand what somebody else is going through in order to be able to get the best out of them?
Without doubt, you need to understand what they're going through. And I think, again, if I reflect on 40 years, I've ended up probably being more sympathetic to other people's views than I was when I was a young, impatient 20-year-old. And I work for a great guy who's, sadly no longer with us. But, he taught me an expression 20 years ago when he said, you should always put yourself in the shoes of someone else. And I've remembered that phase, and I've often thought, well, actually, if I was in that position and I as a leader was saying something, how does that translate? And what does that person think about how I'm behaving and what I'm saying? So absolutely, you've got to whether you step in someone else's shoes or whether you look hard in the mirror and think about how you're coming across. Really important qualities.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for that, because it does reflect what I've heard from a lot of leaders that I've been talking to. And emotional intelligence has become, again, a big platform for developing people, saying to people, not only do you need to understand how other people are feeling, but you need to be able to express how you're feeling. So it was the combination of the two that's, and the world has changed in terms of certainly the leadership teams I work with. Nowadays, it's promoted to say it's okay if you're feeling vulnerable. In fact, vulnerability is a good thing. I think that possibly you and I are carved from the same rock. We're a bit old school, and certainly my upbringing from my father was, vulnerability doesn't have a place. But would you say that you need to be allowed to be vulnerable if necessary in a team or in a company in order to get the best out of people?
Yeah, you do. And, in my DNA, I mean, I went to a boarding school. So, one of the things to learn pretty quickly there is you never ever show any emotion or any sign of weakness. And, it's taken quite a few years to kind of get over that. But as I said earlier, everyone, has their own weaknesses. And I think these days it's actually really, really important to be able to ask for help. It's a sign of a good, emotionally intelligent leader to try and figure out when people need help, but actually, you can't just sit there dealing with zombies who you've no idea how they're feeling. But absolutely, if you need help, you should put your hand up and ask for it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, listen, I'm not going to take much more of your time, but there's two things I want to ask you, kind of to bring it to a close, if you like. The first one is around role models. You mentioned somebody that clearly had an impact on you, and he's no longer with us. And I think you said that it was someone in the industry. Do you think that it's important to have a role model? Do you think that that they have a place, and do you think they should be talked about, and we should learn from them, or it's just a private thing that we keep in our heads? And
I think it's really important to have role models, and I've had different role models throughout my time. Sometimes it was a conscious role model. It's someone who sometimes it was somebody who actually took an interest in my own career and development, and I didn't really realize I was being mentored, but I was being mentored. There have been other times when I've looked at someone and thought, actually, that person's really smart, or they've got this skill. I'm going to study them and try and learn from them. There are other times when I talked earlier about how to deal with failure. I mean, go and listen to what how an Olympic athlete deals with failure. They train for something for 4 years and then they come fourth, right? And the good people then go back for more and then work out what it takes to come first next time around.
Yeah,
So
I agree. Funnily enough, there was a long time ago, there was an Olympic coach called Frank Dick, who he was well known in the world because he went into the motivation circuit, and but he did a lot of work on explaining how you could spot an athlete that had just come third in an event, but was organically and genuinely celebrating the success of the person who'd won. They were probably the people to watch because they had the right attitude. They were trying to think, what have they done that I haven't? But also, I'm really pleased for them. So that was interesting. Okay, so my last question to you really is: I know that you've got two boys because I know them. I coached at least one of them at rugby, and they went to school with my son. What advice have you, or would you give either of them in their career choices? And if they're just looking to you for wisdom in terms of how to succeed in their chosen careers?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. I mean, firstly, I think it's really important not to micromanage your children. Everyone's got different parenting styles, but the advice I've given our two boys and consistently said two things to them. Firstly, do something that you want to do and that you're going to enjoy doing. Second, think about your integrity and your own personal behavior, ethics, call it whatever you will, because at the end of the day, your ethics and your personal integrity will define who you are as an individual. And it's a long game, and you've got to live with yourself. And the insurance world is a funny old world in many ways because it's kind of built on trust. But I still have people who I remember 35 years ago who did something that I thought was inappropriate or whatever. And you still see those people and you think, actually, I don't trust that person. So set your own personal standards and live by them.
That's a very, very good piece of advice. And I like the thing you've referenced, which is these behaviors or the impact of these behaviors stick with people forever. It's a bit like, the younger generations are constantly told at school, just remember that your digital footprint never goes away.
Yeah.
And it's very, very similar. So, okay, listen, Julian, that's been absolutely brilliant. I'm very lucky to have lots of pals like you who have climbed the greasy pole and ended up somewhere near the top or at the top. And we've learned from failure and success, which is the important thing. But there's a lot of good stuff there, and I'm very grateful to you for your time.
Yeah, and thanks, Katsi. I mean, I've clearly enjoyed working with you. I think we've got a good chemistry between us in terms of sort of similar attitudes about leadership and coaching. But the important thing, certainly, when you started helping one of the businesses I was previously associated with, 10 years ago, actually realised that we all need help. You all need someone who's going to stand outside the room and look into the room and say, well, actually, have you thought about this? And, whether it's leadership or whether it's just life, it is about, continual development and to develop, you need to be self-critical and to move on because you never stop learning.
I completely agree. And actually, it's when we both used to coach rugby, I was like a sponge trying to learn as much as I could about coaching rugby. And then I got to a point when I thought, I need to learn so much more to advance. I can't learn anymore because it's too big a step for me. And actually, that's why I stopped. But that's a different thing. But it was that thing about you've got to keep learning and keep developing and keep growing. So I'm just going to